always struck me for that sequence as most dynamic. Actually, the story that we received was How to Survive on a Desert Island, which was basically Jules Verne's original concept. But we felt we could improve it and make it much more interesting than just survival type of picture by incorporating some strange creatures in it.
They were all oversized, therefore more dangerous versions of otherwise ordinary animals. Eventually, we and the castaways learn they are being bred for giganticism by Verne's visionary Captain Nemo, who hopes they will feed an overpopulated world.
Actually, we found this crab in Harrod's fish department, believe it or not. And we didn't want to boil it because it would turn it bright red. So it was necessary to turn it over to a lady in the museum who destroyed it in a humane way, and then gave me the sections in which I had to build a proper armature for stop-motion photography. When we were shooting the ultra close-ups of the crab's little area in the mouth here, in which it operates many different levers and hairs that vibrate, we got 4 more live crabs. They were called edible crabs. We had a delightful meal after they served their purpose.
The most spectacular of these creatures was this really big bird. Most people thought of it as an imaginative variation on some sort of domesticated fowl.
Bernard Herrmann, who did the music, realized that, and when we were looking at the picture, I remember him saying, "Ray, I'm going to use turkey in the straw for this sequence." And I thought, oh my God, no, but he was pulling my leg, of course.
Thorahochus in the sand would be more like it. Ray had modeled this creature on the prehistoric bird. There's nothing funny about a giant bee. It's all too easy to imagine what his sting would feel like. He also had plenty of bare flesh for a target.
Get in the honeycomb.
We had a sequence where the bee sealed them in the honeycomb. And that sequence was rather interesting because it had to be shot backwards so that I gradually destroyed and had the bee open up the honeycomb. And then, of course, when it was run backwards, it looked like he closed the honeycomb.
Sealing us in.
Another of Ray's long-cherished dreams was to make H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. This magnificent group of conceptual drawings suggests he would have taken a witty approach to one of science fiction's basic texts. This model of one of the aliens who invaded Earth implies a certain sympathy for these creatures. So does the test footage he made. It is of the story's ironic climax, showing the fearsome man from Mars succumbing to an ordinary earthly illness from which he has no immunity. Ray finally got to do a Wells story, First Men in the Moon. There was no attempt to update Wells. The space capsule, all the film's technology, was quaintly Victorian, just as Wells might have envisioned it when he wrote in 1900. The moon's inhabitants were designed to follow Wells' descriptions very closely.
H.G. Wells did suggest that perhaps the ant-men grew intelligence far in advance to the human race on Earth. So we wanted that element, and I designed the moon creatures as ants, intelligent ants. He also described the creatures that the ants lived off of. They raised these creatures like we would raise cattle for food.
If that's a cow, I wouldn't like to meet a bull. Come on, Kevin!
Dr. Caver, the expedition's leader, was played by Lionel Jeffries. The Moon Men study the stranger in a kind of super X-ray machine. Ray's pre-production sketches didn't imagine Jeffries, but like the film itself, the actor caught the adventurous idealism of a more innocent age.
Man, we come from Earth, many hundreds of thousands of miles away. No, it doesn't mean a thing, nothing at all. Man. Yes! Man! Did you hear that? They're trying to communicate with us. Why, that's imperial! It's absolutely Man! From hundreds and thousands of miles away! Man! From Earth. That's splendid! It's splendid! It's absolutely imperial. Yes! My dear fellow, it is! It's absolutely imperial!
I've seen some of the fantasy films before, but none of them sort of had the sort of awe that the Ray Harryhausen movies had because of the fact that they're characters. There are synthetic characters that are alive, that are moving around in the sets with you, and that are affecting real people that are obviously can't possibly be real.
I think we both favor Jason the Argonauts as our favorite picture. I think it was the best picture we did. I think it had highly imaginative sequences. When you talk about a seven-headed hydra, when you talk about skeletons rising out of the ground, these are memories that you don't really forget. They're totally memorable, and they don't remind you of any visual thing that you've seen.
This monstrous figure was only the beginning of the film's wonders.
Tails.
In the original story of Jason and the Golden Fleece, there was a character in it called Talos, although he was not as large as we depicted him in the picture. He was only 8 feet high. But when I started the design process for the sequence, I felt we could get much more menace if he could be about the size of the Colossus of Rhodes. And this became a great opportunity to combine the concept of the Colossus of Rhodes with the Metal Man. And I had to make his movements very stiff and ungainly because he was supposed to be made of metal. So we put the sound effects of creaking joints and creaking metallic sounds scraping together to give that eerie effect.
Spectacular as he was, Talos was fairly simple to create, compared, say, to the Hydra, who guards the Golden Fleece. Easy to imagine a seven-headed monster, fiendishly difficult to animate him. Todd Armstrong, playing Jason, had the easy job. He only had to slay the monster. Ray had to bring it to persuasive life. All those heads in constant, simultaneous, menacing motion.
There were many times when I regretted even thinking of the Hydra for the film. He presented so many animation problems that I didn't anticipate. Number one, if the telephone rang and I was in the midst of animation, I would forget sometimes whether this head was going forward or backwards, and this head going up or down, and the various other problems with the other heads. It became quite confusing.
Ray always worked alone, without assistance. Since there's more to seamless animation than perfect movement, he would often stay overnight in his studio to make sure the temperature of his lights remained constant. If it varied, the colors in his work wouldn't match that of the live-action footage. Ray's masterpiece and most famous sequence, the mass rising of the dead in Jason. In its complexity, it had no precedence. In his work, or anyone else's.
Those who steal the golden fleece must die.
Skeletons are really my best friends, so 7 of them was quite a challenge, and I hesitated developing that idea because what I put on paper has to be put on the screen. That's one of the sales gimmicks, so I try not to draw anything I can't possibly do.
Kill! Kill, kill, kill them all!
You have 5 appendages on each skeleton, so that means 7 times 5 is 35. You have to make 35 moves when you have 7 skeletons on the screen for 1 frame of film. And that meant at certain periods when we had all 7 skeletons in the same scene with the 3 men, I was only able to average about 13 frames a day.
That's a little over a half second of film. Ray worked on this sequence 4.5 months. Before that, its live-action elements required meticulous planning. This still shows stuntmen helping the actors rehearse. When the players had their movements perfectly memorized, the stuntmen stepped out of the picture, and the actors shadow-boxed opponents they would not see until the film was finished. 1 million years BC took Ray back to a far more distant past, and to his own beginnings as a boy whose imagination was fired by the drama and adventure of prehistoric times. Ray's actors, these models, which now reside in a Berlin museum, were as anatomically correct as his study of paleontology could make them. Because this was a fantasy film, he felt free to bring together creatures that had lived in different geological eras. That included human beings who did not share the earth with dinosaurs or pterodactyls.
Miss Raquel Welch had to be picked up by an animated pterodactyl. That made it necessary that we construct a small model of Miss Welch so that she was able to be animated at the same time as a pterodactyl. We dug a large hole in the sand, and at a certain point, Miss Welch would throw herself into the hole. The miniature Miss Welch would be substituted. The animated character would pick up the miniature Miss Welch and carry her off into the skies.
Mixing and matching figures from different ages was a delightful Harryhausen specialty. In the Valley of Guanji, cowboys encounter prehistoric creatures in the remoter reaches of Mexico, circa 1900.
The Valley of Guanji was actually a product that Willis O'Brien originated and was working on for about a year. It had all the elements. It had the dinosaur, which was very popular. It had the cowboys. Cowboy pictures at that time were very popular. So we felt if we could combine these 2 elements, that we would have a good chance of success.
This sequence had been a particular favorite of O'Brien's when he conceived the film in 1942.
I wanted that sequence to be kept in more than anything else. But the one problem technically was that we had to have something for the cowboys to rope. So we put a pole on a Jeep, and the cowboys would throw their lasso over the pole, and then I would eliminate the Jeep and substitute Guanji. And then, of course, each frame of film, you had to animate a miniature wire going over Guanji's head and still have it connected to the source.
Keep him tight!
Ray also loved to bring together mythological figures from widely disparate cultures. The Golden Voyage of Sinbad and Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger are his freest explorations of these possibilities.
Even though in the Muslim world they would never have a figurehead on a boat, we took that liberty to have Sinbad have a figurehead aboard his boat and gave Sinbad an encounter with a very unusual element.
They became golden voyages through the myths of the world.
The griffin and the centaur both come from legend and mythology. The griffin is of possibly Norse origin. The centaur comes from Greece and may go as far back as ancient Indian mythology.
They had originally planned to shoot Voyage in India, hence Kali. She stayed in the picture, even though it was eventually made in Spain.
In order to rehearse all the 6 arms with the actors who were playing the part, we had to strap 3 stuntmen together with a big belt. It was rather a grotesque sight on the set, I must say.
She was many hands full of trouble for John Philip Law playing Sinbad. Trog, short for troglodyte, was a sort of missing link and the most touching figure in Sinbad and the Eye of the Tiger.
No harm. We mean no harm.
Gentled by love, Trog would eventually defend his new human friends from a remarkable nemesis.
Sabertooth, I'd never seen it in a film before, so I thought we could make use of it. A cat is always more difficult to do than other types of animals. They have such slow-moving feline postures that it makes it very difficult to animate it in that way.
For all his ferocity, the tiger required very delicate handling. If in touching him, Ray ruffled his fur in the wrong way, the camera would see it. It's a masterpiece of Ray's maturity. Yet, like all his work, it speaks of, and to, a child's sense of adventure.
There's a certain childlike quality I think one has to maintain for the love of a fairy tale, for the love of fantasy.
Nothing reflected that love more memorably than Ray's Pegasus, created for his last film, The Clash of the Titans. As he did for all his characters, Ray drew hundreds of storyboard sketches, pre-planning Pegasus's screen life in infinite detail. But that was only part of the creative process.
In most films that I'd seen in earlier times about Greek mythology, they always pictured Pegasus with very small wings, and you were never quite convinced that they could lift him off the ground. And I found it a challenge to try to make a convincing-looking flying image that would give you the illusion that the horse could be actually lifted into the air. When Perseus tried to break him in, of course, he was supposed to be a wild horse. So I felt that we could get away with having a bucking bronco effect when Perseus first jumps on his back and takes him off into the air. What would the horse do except try to get rid of him?
Titans is, of course, based on a story drawn from Greek mythology. Trying to win the hand of his beloved Andromeda, Perseus is presented with many obstacles far more formidable than taming this wild, ultimately devoted steed. None was more frightening than his encounter with Medusa. Ray virtually reinvented this evil goddess, departing completely from the way artists through the centuries had portrayed her.
The scene with the Medusa in the labyrinth is absolutely incredible. I think it's the finest piece of work he ever did. And it's a masterwork of lighting, of animation, and of drama.
Adding to the challenge, Ray lit the scene by flickering fires, an enormously difficult illusion to sustain in stop motion.
Medusa was a very interesting character to work with, although very complicated to animate. For each frame of film, which is 1/24th of a second, you had to move 12 snakes in her hair, the heads and the tails of each snake. Then you had to move the hand. Then you had to move the arm. You had to keep the body in synchronization with the rest of the torso, with the tail, with the rattle. I didn't want to make just a normal woman with snakes in her hair. That wouldn't turn anyone into stone. So I felt we had to make her as ugly as possible and have this power in her eyes to turn people to stone. We gave her a serpentine quality, an evil look, so that she would be more of a menace than just a pretty face with snakes in her hair. Then we could get wonderful effects. We could get the rattle in her tail as a sound effect of threat. The Greeks always thought their gods were the same as the human beings. They had the same foibles, the same misgivings that the human would have. But they were just larger people living on Mount Olympus.
The gods, presided over by Laurence Olivier's Zeus, manipulated, toyed with the fates of humankind, sometimes mischievously, sometimes malignly, as in the case of the rebellious Calabos.
You will become abhorrent to human sight. You'll be shunned and forced to live as an outcast in the swamps and marshes. You'll be transformed to a mortal mockery, a shameful mark of his vile cruelty.
In a way, what the gods did is not so different from what Ray has done all his life, controlling the lives and destinies of his subjects.
I don't think there's any special, strange quality that made me want to have a God complex. But when you look at it, you say, here you're putting on the screen images that appear to be alive, and you're controlling exactly what they do. And that's why this concept in Greek mythology appealed to me so much, that the gods were manipulating humanity.
What we all want is power. We as boys and as young men and as men, want to control the world as best we can. One of the ways to do it is by writing short stories where you run the characters through their roles and you destroy them or build them. And the other way is doing what Ray has done.
It might be that you've got control of this. You know, you can build it, you can tell the story, you can photograph it, you can then display it the way you meant it to be seen. That's a really interesting idea.
I think in the end the reverse is true, that we tend to serve the puppet.
In an age of computerized animation, Ray Harryhausen's work reminds us of the human hand's value. At a time when vast teams create special effects sequences, his work reminds us of what the committed individual can accomplish on his own. In this moment of the mechanized imagination, this unforgettable work recalls for us the value of the open and wondering eye, the informed and compassionate heart.
¿Cuáles son tus películas favoritas de Ray Harryhausen? Dínoslo en los comentarios. Suscríbete y toca la campanita, así podremos avisarte cada vez que haya un nuevo vídeo disponible.